Hi, I'm Dave Dooley, the president of the University of Rhode Island, and I want to welcome you to this year's Honors Colloquium, Challenging Expectations, Disability in the 21st Century. And frankly, given everything that's going on in our country, it could not be a more timely topic. I want to thank Professors Tiffany Kessler and Anita Jacobson from the Colleges of Health Sciences and Pharmacy, and Lynn Derbyshire, the director of our honors program, for organizing this year's Honors Colloquium. Frankly, we think that despite its virtual format, this will be an exceptional colloquium for you to participate in and enjoy and learn from. In fact, if this goes like many of our other virtual events, we'll have far more people able to participate in this year's Honors Colloquium than in colloquia in the past. I'd just like to encourage you also to check out on the URI webpage 2 TEDx talks that were given by our students, one by Rachel Ferrara and the other by Aria Loberti, who gave tremendous talks about their experiences here at the University of Rhode Island as a student who might have in another time been labeled disabled. But they make the point, and it's an excellent point, and one that they make compellingly, that their contributions and their experience here at the University of Rhode Island were at a level that all of us should aspire to, and frankly, all of our students who come to URI should aspire to. So if you get a moment, check out those 2 inspirational talks. And also, we look forward to a whole series of inspirational talks, discussions, questions as we go forward with this Honors Colloquium in 2020.
Hello. My name is Dondi Hayes, and I am the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Rhode Island. I am pleased to join President Dooley in welcoming all of you to the 2020 URI Honors Colloquium. For more than 50 years, the University of Rhode Island, through its honors program, has sponsored a honors colloquium, which invariably addresses some of the most compelling, relevant, and important issues of the day. Certainly, that is the case for this year as well. The theme for the Honors Colloquium this year, as you know, is Challenging Expectations, Disability in the 21st Century. It is not a coincidence at all that this year's Honors Colloquium coincides with the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act. In fact, in our view, this was exactly the right time for us to have broad and candid and informed discussions about disability in America, disability in our own lives and in our community, and how disability intersects with a whole array of critical topics: learning, technology, race, sexuality, entertainment, fashion, and much, much more. There is absolutely no doubt that this will be an engaging as well as an important colloquium that's aimed not only at the URI community of students, staff, and faculty, but to the broader community of Rhode Island, who always enjoy honors colloquia each year. Normally, of course, we gather in Edwards Auditorium every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock in fall semester. But this year, that won't be possible. So we hope you will enjoy the colloquium from the comfort of your living room at home, and maybe invite some friends over who will physically distant with you, but enjoy the colloquium and engage in the important dialogue that it inspires. Thank you so much for joining us in the Honors Colloquium. We hope you are safe, and we hope you fully become engaged and learn from the conversations that will take place over the next many weeks. Thank you all. Be safe, and good health to all.
Good evening. Welcome to the University of Rhode Island's 57th Annual Honors Colloquium. The 2020 Honors Colloquium will focus on challenging expectations, disability in the 21st century. Tonight's presenter, Dr. Rick Rader, is co-sponsored by the University of Rhode Island's College of Health Sciences.
Good evening, Rhody Nation, and thank you for joining us for the initial lecture of the 2020 URI Honors Colloquium. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our keynote presenter, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Rick Rader. Rick is a medical doctor and the director of the Habilitation Center at the Orange Grove Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Rick is responsible for the creation, implementation, and evaluation of innovative health delivery systems for individuals with complex intellectual and developmental disabilities across the lifespan. In Rick's own words, he functions as a free-range chicken in crossing disciplines in the pursuit of increasing the longevity of this marginalized population. Rick's cross-training in internal medicine and medical anthropology emphasize this approach. Rick was the first appointed special liaison for family health concerns at the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Rick is one of only 6 board-certified physicians in developmental medicine and has been a consultant to 5 former Surgeon Generals in the area of neurodevelopmental disabilities. Rick is the past president of the American Association on Health and Disability and the director of public policy at the American Academy Developmental Medicine and Dentistry. Rick is the editor-in-chief of Exceptional Parent magazine and has published over 300 articles on health and disability. Rick is a member of the Global Medical Advisory Committee at Special Olympics International, where he contributes to the health and wellness program impacting more than 6 million athletes in over 170 countries. Rick has active research programs in sensory processing disorders, dementia, and aging in people with developmental disabilities. In fact, Rick has created the world's first and only center dedicated to joy and disabilities, an ongoing initiative exploring how people with cognitive impairment capture, create, celebrate, express, and share joy. When he isn't doing all of this, Rick also serves as an adjunct professor of human development at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. So sit back, relax, and prepare to enjoy Dr. Rader's presentation titled The Implausible Pursuit of Perfection and its Impact on Our Perception of Imperfect People. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rick Rader, and thank you for joining me for the 2020 University of Rhode Island Honors Colloquium Lecture. When my administrative assistant learned that I was selected to be the keynote presenter at this year's Honors Colloquium, she challenged me to see how many times I can use the word honors in my introduction. So here goes. Among the many honors I have received, it is indeed a special honor to be the honored speaker at this year's Honors Colloquium and to have the honor to present to the honors students enrolled at the URI Honors Program. So that's 7, and I offer to you to challenge future speakers to beat that. I personally want to thank this year's program coordinators, Tiffany Kisler and Anita Jacobson, for their work in organizing this year's proceedings. And of course, my admiration and appreciation, both personally and professionally, to Dr. Gary Ligori. Chattanooga's loss of Dr. Ligori was definitely URI's benefit. And while this is the 57th edition of the URI Honors Colloquium, it is to my knowledge for the first time it is being conducted as a virtual program. The pandemic has caused us to revisit the way we meet, converse, collaborate, communicate, and conduct ourselves. In fact, the word colloquium comes from the Latin colloquial, which means to talk together. And I certainly would have enjoyed the opportunity to be up there with you and to talk together. While it is certainly an opportunity to celebrate the designation of disabilities as this year's theme, it is also an opportunity to pause and ask ourselves, why did it take over a half a century to address this issue? If it wasn't for the 30th anniversary of the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, would disabilities be this year's focus? I think the 50-year span of not addressing disabilities attests to societal discomfort, which including people with significant impairments and our view of their role, their value, and their contribution. The website of the URI Honors Colloquium suggests that, quote, the goal of the colloquium is to get everyone thinking and talking about the important questions of the day. To that, I would like to add, it's also to get you looking, feeling, and acting on those important questions of the day. When it comes to the disability rights movement, it's more than talking and thinking about it. It does indeed require watching, feeling, and acting. I hope my observations today will encourage those responses. To appreciate children as gifts is to accept them as they come, not as objects of our design or products of our will or instruments of our ambition. While this is a wonderful notion, it no longer holds true. Among mothers with a prenatal diagnosis of having a fetus with Down syndrome, over 90% of them opt for termination. They apparently don't see them, quote, as gifts to accept as they come, but products of our will, and the will is apparently often not there. Researchers note that health professionals hold more positive attitudes towards termination of pregnancy for fetal abnormality than do lay groups. Prenatal diagnosis, already accepted as part of obstetrical care, is expanding to include many conditions, disorders, and personality traits. With these new opportunities for aborting affected pregnancies come issues about informed consent and the possibility of social coercion. Furthermore, there is a negative presumption in the medical profession regarding children with these conditions. There is an imbalance of information, with little provided that is favorable to children with special needs. By its very nature, the notion of perfection could and does get pretty involved in its handling by philosophers. Broadly stated, perfection is a state of completeness and flawlessness. It seems like every discipline, notably mathematics, physics, chemistry, aesthetics, ethics, and theology, have had their round with the concept of perfection. The word is derived from the Latin perfezio, meaning to finish or to bring to an end. And that's pretty good if you appreciate that if something is indeed perfect, that's the end of the line in terms of refinement, polishing, editing, or altering. It's sort of the ultimate cry of all pens down. The oldest definition of perfection goes back to Aristotle. He distinguishes three meanings of the term. That is perfect, which is complete, which contains all the requisite parts. That is perfect, which is so good that nothing of the kind could be better. And that is perfect, which has attained its purpose. The ethical question of perfection concerns not whether man is perfect, but whether he should be. And if he should be, then how is this to be attained? Later philosophers believed primitive man was held to be the most perfect, for he was closest to nature. Perfection lay behind present-day man rather than before him, for civilization distanced man from perfection instead of bringing him closer. The ancient Greeks viewed perfection as a requisite for beauty and high art. The Pythagoreans held that perfection was to be found in the right proportions and in a harmonious arrangement of parts. The idea that beauty and art were characterized by perfection was subsequently embraced by Plato, who believed that art ought to be, quote, apt, suitable, without deviations, in short, perfect. It was held that beauty also was a single quality, hence for every kind of art there was but one and only one perfect and perfect form. The Greeks also appreciated that perfection was not always attainable. Nature and other forces often required repairs and restoration. When sculptors noticed imperfection, flaws, and deficits, they had protocols to avoid condemnation and ridicule. They took their lessons from Greek shipbuilders who mixed beeswax and resin to caulk and waterproof hulls. The artists used wax to fill in the imperfections and pass off the repaired pieces as, quote, being perfect. If the mixtures weren't properly prepared, the wax would melt in the sun, revealing not only the imperfections, but the sculpture's attempt at deceit. The word sincere is derived from the Latin sine, meaning without, and cera, meaning wax. Therefore, a sculpture without wax would mean honesty in its perfection. Sincerity is celebrated as both an artistic and social ideal. Perfection, at least in terms of recognized beauty, is represented by a mathematical expression called the golden ratio. Our attraction to people is determined by factors that fall into precise components and references. How close should the eyes be to one another? What about the distance of the lips from the nose? What about how small should the chin be? Or how close to the head should the ears be? We seem to know it instinctively. But the fascination with the golden ratio is not confined just to mathematicians. Biologists, artists, musicians, historians, architects, psychologists, and even mystics have pondered and debated the basis of its ubiquity and appeal. Da Vinci and Salvador Dali used the golden ratio in their art. The design of the Parthenon is based on it, as well as compositions by Debussy and Bartók. In nature, branches along the stem of plants and of veins and leaves conform to the golden ratio, as well as the skeletons of animals and branches of veins and nerves. The seemingly natural and intrinsic appeal of symmetrical arrangements, including innate physical human perfection, is expressed by the golden ratio. When classic art has celebrated beauty and perfection, credit has to be given to an unknown 16th century Flemish painter who depicted what is believed to be the first representation of individuals with Down syndrome. In this patient painting, we see an angelic figure with distinct features of trisomy 21, and the shepherd standing one row back also appears to have the same characteristics. It was painted 3.5 centuries before the syndrome was defined by John Langdon Down in 1866. What was more, the unknown painter of the Adoration of the Christ Child, circa 1550, did not appear to be making any special point about the condition. The Down syndrome characters were participating in the scene the same way everyone else was. So here is art either departing from the notion of perfection or accepting an imperfection as being worthy of placement near the perfect representation of Christ. This is perhaps the earliest representation of inclusion. So let's have a closer look at imperfection and why we try to move the earth to prevent it, avoid it, ignore it, and even turn our back on it. We can tolerate imperfection if served up in small doses. In the early 1960s, the biggest debate about imperfection related to the slight gap in the teeth of model Lauren Hutton. Her agents advised her to correct the imperfection, insisting it would prevent her from getting the top jobs. She didn't and became a top fashion model, cover girl, and cosmetic spokesperson. Society was feeling pretty good about watching a young girl, an imperfect young girl, reaching to the top despite not being perfect. Imperfections were looking like they could be understood, tolerated, and even accepted. In 1962, the thalidomide tragedy put imperfection on the front pages. Thousands of babies were born with phycomelia, or seal limbs, from the side effects of this drug. In a post-war era, when sleeplessness was prevalent, thalidomide was marketed to a world hooked on tranquilizers and sleeping pills. At the time, 1 out of 7 Americans took them regularly. They were deemed safe even for pregnant women. There were 100,000 babies born worldwide with a deficit, half of which survived. And sociologists contend that these children were better off with limb impairments than with a facial disfigurement. Parents of children with Down syndrome consider cosmetic surgery to address the characteristic facial features to help level the playing field. While the appearance of Down syndrome is not considered disfigurement, many believe the features announce that there is an imperfection, not only with the face, but with the person. Sad when we enlist the scalpel to modify preconceived notions of the merits of the individual. Neuroimaging reveals that people experience a diminished neural response in the anterior cingulate cortex when shown images of others with facial disfigurements. A similar response is also seen when people view other stigmatized people, such as those who are homeless. The diminished activity may explain why people are less empathetic towards those who have facial disfigurements and may explain the underlying neural mechanism for dehumanization. And while it's a long reach between Hutton's tooth gap and the imperfections of the author of this poem, I think this captures the essence of imperfection. 'Tis true my form is something odd, but blaming me is blaming God. Could I create myself anew, I would not fail in pleasing you. If I could reach from pole to pole or grasp the ocean with a span, I would be measured by the soul. The mind's the standard of the man. The author of this poem knew a thing or two about imperfection. Joseph Merrick was better known as the Elephant Man. He had severe deformities and was exhibited as a human curiosity in circus sideshows and traveling freak shows. He became well known in London society after he went to live at the London Hospital. Such was his desire to be normal and perfect that he died while trying to sleep in a reclined position, probably from a dislocated neck from the weight of his head. Originally believed to have neurofibromatosis, recent research attributes his disease to Proteus syndrome, named after the Greek god Proteus, who could change his shape. He died in 1890 at the age of 28. Merrick knew a thing or two about stigma. The sociologist Irving Goffman best describes stigma as spoiled identity, and that describes it perfectly. Not only does society tarnish the individual's identity, but it assigns a new one that is discredited for the preconceived inferiority, potential threat, and the unattractive characteristics. Our population, individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, have been stigmatized, thus allowing generations of isolation, institutionalization, and inhumane treatment. Stigma relates to virtually every player in the arena of imperfection. The individuals themselves are certainly stigmatized. but also are the families and the healthcare providers. Physicians, nurses, dentists, and therapists who devote their career to treating this population often hear, as I do, it must be so rewarding for you to see those patients. The sentence is a euphemism to, quote, I guess you couldn't make it in a real practice with real patients. In parents who have opted to terminate their imperfect unborn children, and we will discuss the use of the term unborn child versus fetus, they often cite the global and unbearable stresses that they perceive are inherent in parenting a child with special health care needs. And I think it's worthwhile to explore the trajectory of the stress perception that involving parenting a child with deviates from the profile of perfection. I am fond of posing to my medical students regarding the stress of special needs parenting. I ask them, when do you think the stress of having a child with special needs begins? Does it begin in the first trimester, when the screening is done, when we can test for trisomy 21 and trisomy 18? Or after birth, when the physician delivers the so-called bad news that the child has a serious disability? Or maybe when the grandmother suggests that perhaps something is wrong to her daughter? What about the one spouse questions the development of the child? Often the father who is not engaged all day with caregiving details and sees the child in a different focus or compares the developmental trajectory to brothers or sisters. What about hearing from the teacher that she or he suspects delayed or impaired development and urges screening or assessment? Or maybe it's the play date. When compared to a playmate, the child is not engaged, not stimulated, and not interactive. Years ago, popular culture did not expose families to disabilities. It was a taboo subject, so there was little opportunity to see another child with similar developmental alarms or concerns. When access to the internet, concerned parents often receive their confirmation to their suspicions from other parents who have already been down the same road. And now even grandparents who might have been quietly concerned often provide the evidence that the child may have problems and concerns. Ongoing public awareness programs, especially in autism, have provided basic red flags for parents. Years ago, parental concerns to pediatricians resulted in the physician saying, all children develop differently, let's see them in 6 months. This action, repeated several times, increases the stress and forfeits valuable early intervention opportunities that have shown to be very, very positive. I think the actual time that the stress of having a child with disabilities really begins when young girls start playing with dolls and assume the role of the mother. It's part of the universal affinity for holding, protecting, and embracing that most precious little girls exhibit and demonstrate. It's timeless and instinctive. Little girls learn from watching their mothers or other mothers how to be a mother. They form bonds that often outlive the stitch of fabrics, buttons, and parts of the doll. Years ago, most large cities had doll hospitals to ensure the dolls were fit enough to last the years of intense play. Little girls created scenarios of interactive play. They held them, and they were generally enamored by their role as the play mother. Even little girls with disabilities demonstrated their caregiving inclinations. Even when little girls played doctor, it was for colds and flus. You would never see a little girl pretend her doll had a malformation, a degenerative disease, or an intellectual disability. There, Bambi, Mama loves you, even if you have arms and legs that can't move, ears that can't hear, and a brain that can't think. I still love you. No way. And if you did, they would have been whisked away to a child psychiatrist for some detachment disorder. There was and is an expectation and entitlement that you would have a healthy, happy, beautiful child, and the fallibility of that belief was never considered. Here's some young news that you're probably not going to like. Evolutionary biologists believe we are hardwired, programmed for an affinity for perfection. It's part of our innate survival tactics. It's ingrained, it's intrinsic, it's replicated, and fortified by our own choices. At the fruit stand, we compare, pinch, squeeze, tap, smell, weigh, and even taste to ensure we got the best. The overripe, the discolored, the mushy, the foul-smelling, the oozing gets left behind. We teach our children what to look for, how to grade, how to reject unemotionally the subpar examples. Despite the notion of everyone gets to play, the reality is when the stakes are high and so are the expectations, we pick the winners, at least the characteristics that we associate with winners. The runts get left behind unless it's a Disney movie. We want the best guarantees for the best possible outcomes. We make thousands of subconscious choices every day based on what we believe constitutes the best conditions for our needs. Here's Eleanor Roosevelt, America's most honored, respected, and revered First Lady, the only First Lady to have a monument in Washington, a perennial figure in America's most influential and respected women in the 20th century, a major figure in establishing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations, a woman with the highest accolades, a woman with only one regret. I wish I was prettier. Beauty prevails. Perfection is pursued. The first baby contest on record took place in Springfield, Ohio in 1854. A year later, showman P.T. Barnum organized the National Baby Show in New York. It attracted huge crowds. Over 60,000 visitors came to view the contestants who were judged, especially on the crowning merits of their being genuine original American stock. Infants considered too poor or foreign in appearance were excluded. Doctors would fill out scorecards based on developmental and mental tests, various measurements, and physical tests. Winners were invariably Western and Northern European origin. It was virtually a contest for perfection in baby breeding. Trophies for better baby winners were coveted. Certificates were highly sought after and proudly displayed in the homes. And of course, close on the heels of highlighting best babies was the need to educate people on how to handle the best babies. Choose your husbands because of fine qualities in his family as well as in himself. Advice that is still offered today, and not without good reason. The pseudoscience of eugenics was born and promoted by America's most prestigious institutions, the Rockefeller Institute and the Carnegie Foundation. Supreme Court Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes said 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, in a ruling allowing states to forcibly sterilize feeble-minded people. It is the only time the Supreme Court endorsed surgery as a tool of government policy. All across the country, state fairs had exhibits promoting breeding for improving the human species, the goal being perfection. Lebensborn means spring of life. The Lebensborn project was one of the most secret and terrifying Nazi projects. Heinrich Himmler created the Lebensborn in 1935. The goal of this society was to offer to young girls, racially pure, the possibility to give birth to a child in secret. The child was then given to the SS organization, which provided and supervised their education and adoption. In the beginning, the Lebensborn were SS nurseries, but in order to create, quote, a super race, the SS transformed these nurseries into meeting places for racially pure German women who wanted to meet and make children with SS officers. The children were born in the Lebensborn were supervised by the SS. Over the years, studies of the Lebensborn children revealed that they had multiple developmental and attachment problems. From 1939, one of the most horrible sides of the Lebensborn policy was the kidnapping of children in the Eastern occupied countries. These kidnappings were organized by the SS in order to take by force children who matched Nazis' racial criteria, blonde hair, blue eyes. Thousands of children were transferred to the Lebensborn centers in order to be Germanized. Those who refused the re-education were finally transferred to concentration camps. The others were adopted by SS families. In 1946, it was estimated that more than 250,000 were kidnapped and sent by force to Germany. Only 25,000 were retrieved after the war and sent back to their families. It is known that thousands of children not good enough to be Germanized were simply exterminated. Much of the Nazi defense at the Nuremberg trials after the war were based on the principles laid down by the American eugenics movement. An interesting aside in opposition to the Better Babies contest was the exhibits of neonatal incubators and premature babies in the early 1900s. Promoters established clinic-like exhibit halls at state fairs, amusement parks, oceanfront vacation spots, most notably the one in Coney Island that lasted for 40 years. People would flock to view these tiny, undersized babies that were being miraculously kept alive by these marvels of science. It was a virtual celebration of nature's imperfections being fixed by modern technology. It was a truly remarkable experience that through showmanship and sideshow marketing provided the needed proof that society did not have to quietly and simply accept the hand of chance. Mankind did not have to have a say in how they would respond to nature's indignities. Not since the Elephant Man was there an opportunity to get a peek at imperfection. The incubator babies were proudly displayed in exhibit, almost as prizes in the new science of assistive technology. In the early part of the 20th century, the pseudoscience of eugenics reached its popularity in the United States. In 1904, its organizer, Sir Francis Galton, clarified his definition of eugenics as the science which deals with all the influence that improves the inborn qualities of a race, also with those that develop them to the utmost advantage. He believed it was possible to create a more talented human race by breeding more selectively. Americans were becoming alarmed by the increase in Eastern and Southern European immigrants who they felt were inferior. This, coupled with concern for their own babies' high mortality rate, was the buy-in for eugenics. One of the biggest draws into eugenics was from their Better Babies contest. And while you might think we've come a long way in the acceptance and inclusion of people with imperfections, storm clouds are still forming. Here are 3 examples of why we must remain vigilant, aware, and alert. The Groningen Protocol is a text created in September 2004 by Dr. Uvard Verhagen, the medical director of the Department of Pediatrics at the University Medical Center Groningen in Groningen, the Netherlands. It contains directives with criteria under which physicians can perform active ending of life on infants without fear of legal prosecution. The protocol was created by a committee of physicians and others at the University Medical Center, Groningen, in consultation with the Groningen District Attorney, and has been ratified by the Dutch National Association of Pediatricians. The Groningen Protocol was developed in order to assist with the decision-making process when considering actively ending the life of a newborn by providing the information required to assess the situation within a legal and medical framework. The protocol, as suggested by Verhagen, was agreed upon by the prosecutor's office in Groningen and declared mandatory by the Dutch Society for Pediatrics. For the Dutch public prosecutor, the termination of a child's life up until the age of 12 is acceptable if 4 requirements were properly fulfilled: the presence of hopeless and unbearable suffering, the consent of the parents to termination of the life, medical consultation having had to take place, and also the careful execution of the termination. Meet Amelia Rivera, 3-year-old girl with Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome. She needed a life-saving kidney transplant from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP. Basically, 50,000 people signed a protest letter because CHOP, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, refused to give her a transplant. They said, quote, "We don't waste organs on kids like that." Interestingly enough, there was no request for a transplant organ because the mother of Amelia had a histocompatible kidney, and basically that's what was going to be used. At age 5, she was the recipient of a kidney donated by her mother. It was successful. The Ashley treatment refers to a controversial set of medical procedures undergone by a Seattle child, Ashley X. Ashley, born in 1997, has severe developmental disabilities due to a static encephalopathy of unknown etiology. She is and will remain at an infant level mentally and physically. The treatment included growth attenuation via estrogen therapy, a hysterectomy, bilateral breast bud removals, and an appendicitis. The principal purpose of the treatment was to improve Ashley's quality of life by limiting her growth and size, eliminating menstrual cramps and bleeding, and preventing discomfort from large breasts. The combination of the surgery and the estrogen therapy attracted much public comment and ethical analysis in early 2007, both supportive and condemning. The hospital later admitted that the surgery was illegal and should only have been performed after a court order, a position that is disagreed upon by the attorney of Ashley's family. Noteworthy is that one of the primary doctors involved, the one to perform the hysterectomy on the 6-year-old, committed suicide for unclear reasons. The treatment has been condemned as the medicalization of a social problem. Sadly, after all that has been accomplished in terms of community supports, families still feel that they are unsupported alone and their only reliable resource. Much criticism has been directed for the use of the term pillow angels to describe children like Ashley, named with the intent that these children would never grow to be bigger than a pillow and therefore be able to be controlled by their parents. Growing numbers of American families say they're raising a child who has a disability, and the prevalent conditions are less and less likely to be physical disorders. The top 5 chronic childhood conditions that limit typical activities are some type of developmental, behavioral, or mental problem. For much of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the most common cause has been respiratory disease. Now asthma and breathing problems are number 6, and deafness and orthopedic impairments don't even make the list of top conditions. The report cites data from the National Health Interview Surveys that puts the prevalence of disability for children younger than 18 at about 8% in 2009, up from less than 2% in the 1960s. The increase in autism is unprecedented and bewildering. It affects about 10% of all special education students, up from 2% over the past decade. There's a new player in the arena of pursuing perfection. 30 years ago, the fetus did not virtually exist in medicine. In the late 1970s, the introduction of ultrasound and the possibility to visualize the fetus in utero brought about a true revolution in 2 respects. For doctors, it allowed to diagnose in fetal life problems that until then had only been known to the newborn. For parents, it facilitated the recognition of the fetus as a person. The combination of these 2 factors resulted in the development of a new concept, the fetus as a patient, and with it the beginning of a subspecialty that we now know today as fetal medicine. Once the diagnosis was possible, it soon became evident that some of these fetal problems could be treated in utero. The ability to treat the fetus was called fetal therapy, a concept that now is an indispensable part of fetal medicine proper. The perception of the fetus as a person makes parents with a fetal problem to expect a level of healthcare similar to what is offered to adults, with specialists who can guide them through the steps involved in diagnosis and therapy of fetal diseases. This goal is not always readily achievable, and once again, the pursuit of perfection prior to birth this time will often remain elusive. The concept of the fetus as a patient was first used in the early 1980s. The term has remained controversial, and the debate on its use continues. The old term, the unborn child, certainly is not free from its own criticism. 2 concerns are raised by the use of fetal patienthood. First is the worry that such a designation may encourage a tendency to think of the fetus as separate from the pregnant woman, obscuring the physical and social relationship between the pregnant woman and fetus. The designation of fetal patient may make it easier to think about the pregnant woman herself as an environment rather than a patient in her own right. The second concern, voiced by opponents to the term the fetus as patient, applies to the idea that patienthood is a normative status that connotates concrete expectations for professional engagement. Physicians are duty-bound to the fiduciaries of their patients. This raises the concern that insofar as clinicians regard themselves as having 2 patients, even 2 intertwined patients, that may regard their obligations to and the value of each of their patients as equal. Yet tragically, OBGYNs face circumstances in the context of pregnancy that reflect how important it is to recognize the primacy of the clinician's duty to the pregnant woman. It raises the point that the pursuit of perfection is made more complex by medical advances, and that the ethical, moral, and legal foundations of both medicine and society need ongoing visitation and clarity. A few years ago, a couple decided they wanted to have a child, preferably a dead one. Both partners were deaf, and proudly so. Like many in the deaf pride community, they considered deafness a cultural identity, not a disability to be cured or avoided. They were quoted as saying, "Being deaf is just a way of life. We feel whole as deaf people, and we want to share the wonderful aspects of our deaf community, a sense of belonging and connectedness with children. We truly feel we live rich lives as deaf people." In hopes of conceiving a deaf child, this was a lesbian couple. They sought out a sperm donor with 5 generations of deafness in his family, and they succeeded. Their son was born deaf. Outside of the deaf community, they received widespread condemnation. Most of the outrage focuses on the charge that they had deliberately inflicted a disability on their child. They argue that they simply wanted a child like themselves. Is it wrong to make a child deaf by design? If so, what makes it wrong? The deafness or the design? This is a photo of a young boy, a deaf boy, who received a cochlear implant. This photo shows his expression at the time he heard sound for the first time. While the jury is still out on the ethics of design manipulation to stack the deck in favor of being deaf, there are other avenues of enhancement, all towards the belief that enhancement brings us closer to perfection. Is it wrong for parents to choose physical characteristics for their children that they believe will enhance their lives? Is it appropriate to use gene therapy not to cure a disease, but to reach beyond health? Everyone would welcome a gene therapy to alleviate muscular dystrophy and to reverse the debilitating muscle loss that comes with old age. But what if the gene therapy was simply used to produce genetically altered athletes? Researchers have developed a synthetic gene that, when injected into the muscle cells of mice, makes muscles grow and prevents them from deteriorating with age. The distinction between curing and improving seems to make a moral difference, but it is not obvious what that difference consists of. We recently celebrated the 25th anniversary of the FDA's approval of Botox for cosmetic purposes. Botox was first approved by the FDA to treat two rare eye muscle disorders years ago. Botox treatments have been performed more than 25 million times on more than 8 million people since their approval in 2002. There are virtually drive-through Botox centers, all in the name of perfection. Since the 1980s, human growth hormone has been approved for children with a hormone deficiency that makes them much shorter than average. But the treatment also increases the height of healthy children. Some parents of healthy children who are unhappy with their stature, typically boys, ask for the hormone treatments on the grounds that it should not matter whether a child is short because of a hormone deficiency or because his parents happen to be short. Whatever the cause, the social consequences of shortness are both in the same case. By 1996, such off-label use accounted for 50% of growth hormone prescriptions. Eli Lilly recently persuaded the FDA to approve its human growth hormone for healthy children whose projected adult height is in the bottom first percentile. That would be under 5'3" for boys or 4'11" for girls. Why shouldn't all shorter than average children be able to seek treatment? In the mid-1990s, scientists managed to manipulate a memory-linked gene in fruit flies, creating flies with photographic memories. More recently, researchers produced smart mice by inserting extra copies of a memory-related gene into mouse embryos. The altered mice learn more quickly and remember things longer than the normal mice. The gene the scientists tweaked in mouse embryos is present in human beings as well and becomes less active as people age. The extra copies installed in the mice were programmed to remain active even in old age, and the improvement was passed on to their offspring. One obvious market for such drugs consists of those who suffer from serious memory disorders like Alzheimer's and dementia. But what about the 76 million baby boomers over 50 who are beginning to encounter the natural memory loss that comes with age? Such use would straddle the distinction between remedy and enhancement. For centuries, parents have been trying to choose the sex of their children. Aristotle advised men who wanted a boy to tie off their left testicle before intercourse. The Talmud teaches that men who restrain themselves and allow their wives to achieve sexual climax first will be blessed with a son. Today, biotech succeeds where Aristotle and the Talmud failed. Amniocentesis and ultrasound can reveal the sex of a fetus, allowing for the abortion of a fetus of the undesired sex. While few advocate abortion simply because the parents wanted something else, in societies with powerful cultural preferences for boys, ultrasound determination followed by the abortion of female fetuses has become a familiar practice. In India, the number of girls per thousand boys has dropped from 962 to 927 in the past 2 decades. One Mumbai clinic reported that of 8,000 abortions it performed, all but one were for purposes of sex selection. But sex selection need not involve abortion. For couples undergoing in vitro fertilization, it is possible to choose the sex of the child before the fertilized egg is implanted in the womb. Due to groundbreaking scientific advancements over the last decade, human perfection has been a topic of renewed interest. The quest for human improvement through biomedical means appears to be unstoppable in the developed world. The future will continue to tease us with what is possible. When it comes to confronting imperfections, nothing in the human realm really throws us. As clinicians, teachers, therapists, and advocates, we see it all, handle it all, and we accept it all. What remains intolerable for most of us, what leads to our frustration, our sleepless nights, and the paradoxical vigor to return to work each day, is the ongoing and baffling imperfections in the systems designed to recognize, support, and celebrate the qualities of vulnerable individuals. We need to continue our efforts in perfecting the domains that we created or inherited to address the inevitability of human shortcomings. Few of us have learned to thrive in a world characterized by an abundance of imperfections. So maybe it is time to revisit this quote. To appreciate children as gifts is to accept them as they come, not as objects of our design or products of our will or instruments of our perfection. I want to close with this quote. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And considering that Pelham Street in Newport, Rhode Island was the first street in America to be illuminated by gaslight in 1806, maybe Rhode Island was the perfect place to talk about disabilities and the needed light for all of us to see each other better. Thank you.